Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other world. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Hello and welcome, listeners, readers, and viewers from across America and around the world. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. I thank all of you for taking the time to join us. It's going to be an interesting show. I had planned on speaking about the Great Commission series, Book 1, specifically because this Saturday we begin our weekly digital readers book club, transitioning from the Aramaic and Palestinian Targum into the Gospels and Acts of the Apostles in Book 1 specifically, which there are a number of these manuscripts where the apostles, given the Great Commission by the Most High after having the Holy Spirit come upon them, they then were tasked with going out to all the various parts of the world to spread the good news of the resurrection and redemption of Christ, dying on the cross as the Passover lamb, how his coming incarnation into flesh form had rectified the fall of humanity and had even then restored Adam and those of his righteous bloodline back to their former state and their former bright-natured glory. And so, but there's something that I want to cover previous to going into some of that material, and that has to do with a court case that I was involved in on Pentecost or Shavuot, which just happened on the 11th of June, which is on the Hebrew calendar, the 9th of Sivan, which is the day after the passing of 7 perfect lunar sabbatical weeks, which after the feast, the Sabbath of Unleavened Bread, which begins on the 15th of Nisan, the full moon of the 15th of Nisan, which is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so the very next day, the 16th of Nisan, is the first day of the working week and the first day of the counting of the Omer. And the passing of 7 perfect weeks, discounting Kodesh and translation days, leads us to the day after the 7th Sabbath from that time, which is the 7th Sabbath is the first quarter lunar Sabbath of the month of Sivan. And so the 9th of Sivan occurred on the 11th of June, which was yesterday. But anyways, I had been kind of quiet about what was going on with regard to this case, but it has to do with a challenge that we had put out to the world, anybody, anywhere, citing that if you could confirm through experimentation scientifically verifiable and repeatable experimentation, the rate of the curvature of the Earth, or that the Earth was moving at, even in excess of 50 miles an hour is what we agreed to settle on. Not even the 1,037 miles an hour that NASA claims and other scientists claim that the Earth is moving. 18.5 miles per second is what it is. I mean, can you imagine that? It's just insane. But anyways, that is the model we've been all indoctrinated into. But anyways, and so we put out a challenge, $5,000 of my own money, and then on top of that, $3,250 of other commitments from other individuals to support the challenge and to, bulk up its reward, and which would intrigue in the least the global community and have them take serious the offering that we had put out. And so, and we did receive a lot of inquiry and a lot of individuals who attempted to try to win the money and to meet the stipulations of the challenge. However, knowing and understanding what we have learned, anybody that has open mind and really seriously considers, for instance, things like the Bedford level experiment, which was put forth by Samuel Burley Robotham, who happened to be one of those that figured out through the Pythagorean theorem how to calculate in formula the rate of the curvature of the Earth, which is 8 inches per mile inversely squared. So that after the first mile you have 8 inches of drop, the second mile is 32 inches of drop, the fourth mile 64 inches, and on, inversely squared according to the distance. 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 mile, on and on. And so, and having figured out, he did an experiment where he looked and had this canal near his house called the Bedford Canal, and he did an experiment where he sent a ship over 6 mile distance to see how much the flag that he had tied to the mast would drop, to be able to calculate and see if the curvature of the Earth matched the formula which he had figured for what should have been the drop, according to if the Earth were a globe of 25,000 statute miles. And what he discovered is that there was no drop at all, that zero declination, when there should have been some 11.3 meters after 6 miles. And so, considering the evidence, he had to and did come to the realization that measurable curvature is non-existent, which is the point of the challenge that we did. And this is something that anybody in the world, given just, you can invest just a small amount of money into a laser pointer that was strong enough to, bridge a gap of 1 or 2 miles and confirm exactly what I told you, that curvature is non-existent. And so, the point of the challenge was to test and to challenge all those that do believe that the Earth is a globe to actually examine the evidence, to go out and do their own experimentation, and to come to the same conclusions that we and everybody that has done this test has undeniably had to embrace as fact. And I mean, there's no other ways around it. Doing the test, you will come, if you're honest, you will come to the realization that there is no drop. There is no curvature. And if there's no curvature, well then, obviously, the Earth cannot be a globe or spherical in shape. And so the point of the challenge was to bring people to realization to this. But what I discovered and what I learned over the several months, because we ran the challenge from August of 2017 to, no, actually it was August of 2016 to November of 2017. And what I discovered is that even speaking to and imploring individuals to do this test, especially if they were already scientists with PhD degrees and if or software engineers or whatever, anybody that is supposed to be book smart, that they were unwilling. They wanted to cling to their theoretical evidences and contrivances and base their reality and their truth off of something that was ambiguous and not in any way connected to any kind of real world scenario. They believed in the images that NASA had generated about the Earth being, a globe. They believed that we had gone to the moon, all these different things. And so the greater their education, which those that wanted to do the challenge, many of them were, multiple PhD degrees in various fields, astronomy, astrophysicists, whatever. And they were simply unwilling to hear, unwilling to listen, and unwilling to go and do this one simple test of taking a laser pointer and checking to see if there is any curvature over a 1, 2, 3 mile span. Because if indeed you were to do that test, as I said, you would be forced to consider the evidence, as Robotham had, that measurable curvature is non-existent. And so no matter what you think of the shape of the Earth or the nature of its shape, it certainly can't be round because there is no rotundity. And given that there is no rotundity, one has to reconsider the nature and the shape of the world that we live in, which, again, is a very difficult thing for anybody, all of us that have now come to realization on this issue. It's the hardest thing to go against what you thought you knew of reality and what you had trusted as majority opinion. That why, the whole conspiracy of why would whoever it was that generated the lie and decided to implement it as truth, what is the purpose? Why would those powers forcefully assimilate or just assimilate the entirety of the world to such opinion? What does it matter? Why lie about it? Why not just admit the truth, which is visually confirmable? And why the elaborate lie to fake some kind of, universal cosmological system which did not truthfully exist. I mean, it's just beyond bizarre. But again, when you are a student of the scripture and you realize that Satan is the father of lies and that he has, since his banishment from the heavens and from the throne room of the Most High God, he has since that time been trying to establish New World Order as alternative governing system for the world and for the universe, and to divert the worship of the triune Godhead from the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit to himself. And that part of the agenda and part of the purpose of what is the prophetic coming of the end times is to establish belief in an ever-expanding universe and a solar system where the sun is preeminent and all of the other planetary bodies subjective and, you know, and all orbiting around it in revolution. And then to describe how the sun being the center of our so-called solar system, that all the stars that we see in the sky are suns as well, and that they all have possible planetary systems in orbit around them, and that in like manner as the planetary system we live in, that given one planet is at the exact distance from the sun to be both not over warm or over cold, but exactly correct, can randomly evolve life. And so the deception, the strong delusion where even the most elect could be deceived, should it be possible, in my opinion, is absolutely connected to the Darwinian, Copernican, heliocentric model for understanding world. And that Satan, without a doubt, established evolution and the ever-expanding universe where all the stars are suns with possible life and planetary systems around them, to bring forth an ideology that the ancient gods, the Anunnaki, that they are extraterrestrial and that they came from other worlds and are coming again to reclaim their authority, their power, and their control over this creation. And again, I know that's quite a mouthful, but when you understand in great clarity the design of why it is that even in the Sumerian mythology, which goes and dates back 6,000 years, that they would include a heliocentric model for understanding world and lie elaborately saying that the Anunnaki, trying to save their home world, that they had come here to gather the gold so that they could take it back to their home planet, smash it into powder form and suspend it into their air, into their atmosphere, in order to refract the dangers of the X-rays and ultraviolet and gamma rays of the sun when they came close to it in proximity during their, the 3,600 year orbit where they crossed the ecliptic between the inner and the outer planets here in our so-called solar system. And so even in that mythology, you see that they created these so-called colonies, way stations on both the moon and Mars, and could have, if they had wanted to, visit all of the other planets as they were coming from the outside in. And they describe how blasting through the asteroid belt, which was supposedly a boundary which had never been breached before the coming of Alalu, the first astronaut to reach the Earth and discovering the gold, that he became somewhat of a hero to his people. I mean, the mythology is so elaborate, it's difficult to not believe it, you know, and especially when you consider that this is what the cuneiform texts say, and that particular, the Sumerian culture dating back 6,000 years, and, you know, believed to be the oldest, even though it's now been discovered that the Thracian peoples who were Christians predated them by 1,500 to 2,000 years. But anyways, the fact that they have this encoded into their mythology, and it being that ancient, why would we have any reason to question, is the thing. Why would anybody question the relevancy and the authenticity of the ancient peoples? And who would lead them to lie anyways? But then again, understanding the Bible and that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but powers and principalities and the rulers of darkness, then you understand that Satan, who is the leader and the prince of the air and the one that is the eye at the top of the Illuminati pyramid, that it is he and Legion which were granted temporary rule over the earth in the second world age, that he is the father of lies, and that even the Godhead that he had promised to those that who would join him in rebellion, in trying to overthrow God. I mean, how insane is that? That the angels that were created by God would try to overthrow him. But his appeal was so great and his lies so elaborate that a third of the angels of God believed him, and joining him were exiled and banished with him to this world, and that they would pay the ultimate price, that they would be destroyed, annihilated, and brought under the authority of death. So when the gig is up and the game is over and their time is up, that they would be destroyed as if they had never been. They basically gave up their eternity in order to, as Satan said, you know, I will exalt my throne above the stars and the clouds of God. I will establish my seat in the sides of the north, above the mount of the congregation, and I will be like the Most High. And yet it says, but yet ye shall be cast down to the sides of the pit. And he was. And Christ describes this as, I saw Satan like lightning fall from the heavens. And so this is why it's important to, in examining, you know, the topic of flat earth in biblical cosmology, and that there is no existing curvature to the earth, that one must have a foundation and an understanding on the rest of the scriptures and the battle between the forces of light and darkness, good and evil, Christ and Satan, to understand the other aspect of what we are contending with, what we are dealing with, and why, this issue is important. Because there is coming a time, and the Bible warns us about it, where most of the world will bend the knee to the Antichrist, and accepting him as the true Savior Messiah will then take the mark of the beast, and in that way be condemned and judged for falling away. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this court case. And because I believe it to be very important in that I don't know of any other court case where two sides argued over the shape and the dynamics of the earth to decide the guilt or innocence of one of the parties. And that this argument would take place before a judge and be established and set a precedence in the public record. And so, I believed it to be very important, and so I wrote about it and released some information about this last night to those who follow me on Facebook, and I'll share with you some of the details of that particular case. But as I said, it was based upon that particular contest where we had an open challenge to anybody anywhere in the world that should you be able to, create two individual and separate scientific experiments to verify that curvature did exist, and to the degree of the formula which has become accepted for determination that you could win the money. And so this individual named William Thompson, who was one of many that I was in correspondence with over several months, he was a software engineer and considered himself to be very smart. He was arguing against me and trying to convince the judge that he had met the stipulations of the contest and that he should be rewarded that particular money. And, I was basically arguing that he did not meet the rules and that one could not actually, verify the measurable curvature because it did not exist. And so that was the approach that I took, and I'll share with you, which I don't want to go over. It was 13 pages of evidence that I had read from as my defense, whereas William, he brought in stacks and stacks and stacks of paper, all of our email correspondence, all the so-called software programs that he had created. One was to test the divergence of towers in a bridge to show that there was curvature between them, and also some other program to measure the sunset from the base of a building as opposed to the top of the building, and how, I don't know how, but that you could measure curvature in this manner as well, which both of them were completely baseless in truth, because again, the reality is that there is no curvature, and that one of the arguments that I brought forth was that testing and doing the laser test and the Bedford level experiment, that also engineers and structural designers, those who built bridges, canals, and railways, that they did so on what is a level, and that they do not take into consideration anywhere the supposed measurable curvature of the earth to make their calculations fit to that supposed rotundity. And so, the fact that engineers do not include or take into account such curving is also verification that, such curvature doesn't exist. And so I'll share with you portions of my argument. I won't go into all of it, but before I do so, I want to share with you something that the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer stated. He said that all truth goes through 3 steps. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. And finally, it is accepted as self-evident. I would also add here that William did everything in his power to defame my character, to attack the messenger, and to destroy my credibility in the face of the judge and those that were gathered in the courtroom, and that he also brought up as label, flat earther and conspiracy theorists. He even included into his argument that conspiracy theorists and flat earthers also believe that, vaccines were dangerous and deadly, and that, they caused, which they do, but, for a judge, that might sound a little extreme. But anyways, and then he also brought in his opinion that the whole precedence of flat earth was dangerous to children and to the educational system, and that the ignorance that it breeds, should be stopped and thwarted with this particular court case. And he said that it was important that the judge set precedents here to defend and to support the indoctrination or the findings of NASA that, the earth is a globe. And that he also, it was ridiculous, but he said that if he would have had more time, he would have been able to get all of these high-level guests. He mentioned Neil Tyson and some senator and other people. I mean, it was really kind of funny if it wasn't, the risks weren't so great, because he was suing me for $15,000. And so, anyways, let me pull up here. And I hope that all of you can hear me clearly. And as I said, I appreciate you joining me. this evening for show. And as soon as this article comes up, I'll begin reading. I'm only going to read portions to give you an idea, but for those that may be interested in reading the entire defense, I did post it on my Facebook page as a note, and it's global versus flat Earth court case. And as I said, I don't know of any other court case where the focus of the contention and the argument being spoken about and elaborated upon in a court of law, in an official, this was a civil court. I don't know of any other case having taken place where the focus was on cosmology and the shape of the earth and whether curvature truly did exist. If anybody else knows of anything, especially of recent or modern time, I would be interested in, knowing more about that, because I think this was really historical, what was happening, and it gave a victory to alternative opinion and to questioning in the indoctrination of majority opinion. And I was just so grateful that the judge was open-minded enough to actually hear and listen to what I was saying and not be so closed off or in some manner superior to the information to not even take into consideration those things that I was saying. And so I'll read a little bit about the case. This is from that note. It says, I'm pleased to announce that on this Shavuot, or Pentecost, the 9th of Sivan, that the judge presiding over a civil court case in which I was being sued for the amount of $15,000 ruled in my favor and sided with the evidence I presented that whether one believes the earth to be a globe or a flat plane, one must consider evidence in opposition of the supposed existence of the earth's curvature. Imagine the shock of those in the courtroom when exposed to the arguments for and against viewpoint that the earth could hold shape contrary to what we have been as public largely indoctrinated into belief. I was so relieved that the judge would actually hear and consider the facts of this case, and in doing so, state in conclusion that no matter one's belief on whether the earth was a globe or flat, certainly there is much to consider when examining the evidence. With that, I will submit below the statement that I read into the Barrow County Magistrate Court public record here in Winder, Georgia, June 11th at 9 p.m. Eastern. Know that some of this material has been amended to bring forth clarity, however, does in fact truthfully represent the details of the case against me. For the record, the court case, Plaintiff William Thompson versus Defendant Zen Garcia. Plaintiff suing the defendant for $15,000, believing that he had honored the rules of a contest put forth by Zen Garcia as to whether the earth possessed a measure of curvature defined by the formula of 8 inches per mile squared inversely according to the distance of such calculation. Thompson believes that he has satisfied the rules of the contest set forth by Garcia and deserves just compensation. Thompson claims that he had developed two software programs which between them allowed the Earth's curvature to be measured in one instance between different towers spanning a bridge and the other to calculate the amount of curvature existing between witnesses on the ground and others at the top of buildings when watching sunsets. The defendant, Garcia, shared numerous real-world examples which dispelling the existence of measurable curvature, should the Earth be a globe of 25,000 miles circumference, stated that given the evidence, one must reconsider whether the Earth is truly spherical in shape or like a plane, flat and level, as the evidence suggests. To whom it may concern, and this was the opening. At the end of 2014, a co-host and colleague of mine, known by the broadcasting handle The Hijacker, began imploring me to examine a topic which for some reason began garnering a lot of interest on the internet. The issue had to do with whether scientists were correct or not in their calculation of the Earth's measurable curvature. Many of my listeners likewise continued in suggestion that I examine this topic with open mind. Having studied astronomy for 3 years as my requisite college science and familiar with the dynamics and construct of the solar system, I felt I would be able to settle this question quickly and then return to my normal programming. Looking for an informative answer as to the Earth's rate of curvature, Google led me to the Bedford level experiment. Conducted in 1838 by Samuel Burley Robotham, a mathematician and scientist, he was able to use the Pythagorean theorem to determine a formula by which one then can measure the Earth's rotundity. His calculation can be affirmed by the Pythagorean theorem. The Pythagorean theorem dictates that the sum of the square of adjacent and opposite sides equals the square of the hypotenuse in a right triangle. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Attempting to calculate the distance that the Earth drops down per mile, the equation would be radius squared plus distance squared equals radius plus drop squared. The measure or rate of the drop of curvature can be written in equation as square parentheses r squared plus d squared end parentheses minus r equals the drop. Should the radius of the Earth be 3,963 miles, at 1 mile distance, the equation can be solved as square parentheses 3963 squared plus 1 squared and parentheses minus 3963 equaling the drop. Putting that into a calculator, you get drop equals 0.000126 miles. Therefore, there are 5,280 feet in a mile and 12 inches in a foot. So the 0.00126 multiplied by 5,280 multiplied by 12 equals the rate of curvature should correspond to 7.98336 inches as calculated by Robotham. In 1849, Robotham published the Zetetic Astronomy under the pseudonym Parallax, where he reported this formula as equation for how to determine the rate of the curvature of the Earth. He said, if the Earth is a globe and is 25,000 statute miles in circumference, the surface of all standing water must have a certain degree of convexity. Every part must be an arc of a circle. From the summit of any such arc, there will exist a curvature or declination of 8 inches in the first statute mile. In the second mile, the fall will be 32 inches, the third mile 72 inches, or 6 feet as shown in the following diagram. And I provided all these diagrams, which they are not in the note that I wrote, but all the pictures and evidence were part of the paper that I submitted in defense. After the first few miles, the curvature would be so great that no difficulty could exist in detecting either its actual existence or its proportion. In the county of Cambridge, there is an artificial river, a canal called the Old Bedford. It is upwards of 20 miles in length and passes in a straight line through that part of the fens called the Bedford level. The water is nearly stationary, often completely so, and throughout its entire length has no interruption from locks or water gates or any kind, so that it is in every respect well adapted for ascertaining whether any or what amount of convexity really exists. All right, continuing. Based upon the Pythagorean theorem and simplified mathematics, he cited the following formula for use in determining said curvature. Miles squared, or 8 inches, distance in miles squared, meaning that over a certain distance, one must simply square the root of the distance traveled in miles and then multiply that figure by 8 inches. For example, traveling 1 mile, one would multiply 8 times 1 times 1 and then square that number, and it would equal 8 inches of total curvature. Determining curvature over the first 10 miles in inches, the rate would amount to 32 inches in 2 miles, 72 inches in 3 miles, 128 inches in 4 miles, 200 inches in 5 miles, 288 inches in 6 miles, 392 inches in 7 miles, 512 inches in 8 miles, 648 inches in 9 miles, and 800 inches of total curvature in 10 miles. When you convert this to feet, in 1 mile it is 0.66 feet, in 2 miles 2.66 feet, in 3 miles 6 feet, in 4 miles 10.6 feet, in 5 miles 16.6 feet, in 6 miles 24 feet, in 7 miles 32.6 feet, in 8 miles 42.6 feet, in 9 miles 54 feet, and in 10 miles the drop would correspond to 66.6 feet of curvature. And so you notice that from this table that even after a mile, 8 inches, that's significant enough that it should be easily detectable. And doing a laser test over 2 miles, that's 2.6 feet. That's half of the size of a human person. So, that's significant. Should be easily detectable. And then going over that, the curvature is so great that should easily be measured. In 3 miles, 6 feet of curvature. I mean, that's a whole person, so. All right, so continuing. To test this hypothesis, Robotham conducted what is now the famous Bedford level experiment. Tying a flag to the mast of the boat sent 6 miles across the Steel Canal waters, he determined with the use of a telescope that there was no change in height. Given the accepted circumference of the Earth's sphericity, the top of the mast should have been some 11 feet, 3.4 meters below his line of sight. Which again, there was no drop. Considering that measurable curvature was non-existent, Robotham, like myself and many of my colleagues, now had been forced to consider whether there was any truth to the existence of curvature, a fact which can be verified in conducting a simple experiment with the use of a laser pointer and a mirror. Doing this simple test, many were led to the realization that the Earth had no rotundity to its form. This fact, as bizarre as it is one that anyone, anywhere, can visually affirm for themselves in simple experimentation. Considering this discovery, one will also be forced to reckon with the fact that lighthouses, islands, monuments, statues, and cityscapes can also verifiably be seen beyond the scientifically accepted formula for determining the sphericity of the Earth. All right, I'll stop there till we come back from the first break. But, actually, I'll end with this paragraph since it fits right in. Likewise, when considering the natural properties and physics of water, it is difficult to conceive in affirmation how the Earth's oceans could possibly adhere to its surface, given that water will always drip or leak off of any form which does not, in a basin, contain it. Water always, at its lowest point, gathers in pool before settling out in level. Becoming aware of this information, I, in 2015, published the first of a 3-book series called Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, to bring others to awareness on this issue. And so when we come back, I'll actually describe the contest and the reasons why I put forth this challenge and go into the details of that. We'll be right back for a second hour.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Okay, I do believe that we are back. And so, we'll pick it up. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. I thank all of you for joining me, and I'll ask that everybody pray for Doc Michael, that he overcome his challenges and troubles. And in the least, I hope and I pray for all of you, as I do for myself, that we should try to do that as much as possible, to pray for each other and one another and encourage and empower each other in that manner. That, prayer is a very powerful and misunderstood ability to tap into God's support and blessings. And so let's all pray for each other. All right, great. Thank you, Basement. All right, going back to the contest portion now. And then after laying out this aspect of this document, then I'll go into some real world visual evidence. The contest. After this publication, speaking about my Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, which was my 9th book, confident in what I had learned in my research, it is then that I had the idea of holding a contest which would likewise challenge others to themselves to investigate this discrepancy. My hope was that others would also recognize that something was amiss according to what we had traditionally been taught in academia. And so, offering $5,000 to any individual anywhere in the world, the payout was contingent on somebody submitting 2 scientifically repeatable experiments which could verify the curvature of the Earth according to the rate and accepted formula for determining such declination, should again the Earth be a sphere with a 25,000-mile circumference. The contest ran from August of 2016 until November of 2017, which was the date of the first International Flat Earth Convention held in Raleigh, North Carolina. William Thompson was one of the many which inquired to and tried to meet the challenges of the contest. Over the course of several months, I had many discussions with him where I pointed out the clear evidence that one can visually see structures like landmarks, cityscapes, statues, lighthouses, and even islands beyond what was accepted as being this formula for determining such curvature. I very clearly stated in the rule of that one would have to produce experiments which were verifiable in real-world scenario and situation in which could be repeated by others in following similar scientific method. Creating 2 software programs, one to measure the distance between towers on the Golden Gate Bridge and the other to measure the so-called curvature of the Earth when watching sunset for both the base and the top of a building, Thompson was never able to create or present any type of experiment which could truly confirm the rate of curvature as decided upon by mathematicians and scientists themselves for determining that rate. He instead submitted several videos where he argued with me over the formula for determining measurable curvature. I implored him to conduct a simple laser test to see if measurable curvature truly did exist. Refusing to do so and attempting to argue from a hypothetical point of view, I had to at some point just simply not respond to his attempts to base his evidence on conjecture. If one is not going to look at the real-world evidence, there's no amount of convincing to one that is dead set against open-mindedly examining the facts. My conclusions are based on numerous real-world examples, as I will list in scenario below. It was made clear, however, in the rules that the designed experiments must adhere to and confirm the formula for determining such declination. As the court is forced to consider, his so-called evidence cannot be verified in real-world situation. Thus, the experiments, quote-unquote experiments, which he submitted were in no way applicable or accepted by me as evidentiary proof. The following real-world evidence is, as I suggest, proof of Robotham's Bedford level experiment. Example 1. Using the formula for calculating measurable curvature, we apply them to real-world scenarios like, for instance, New York's Statue of Liberty. Standing 326 feet above sea level, she can be, on a clear day, seen from as far as 60 miles away. Applying the formula for determining the rate of measurable curvature on a globular Earth, such appearance should be impossible given that 2,072 feet of curvature should exist in obstructing between Lady Liberty and the viewers at that distance. Example 2. Photographer Joshua Nowicki a few years ago caused an enormous controversy when, standing on the shores of Lake Michigan, he was able to snap a picture of the Chicago skyline from 50-plus miles away. His panoramic view became a spectacle given that it should be impossible at that distance to see visually even the antenna sitting atop the 108-story Willis, formerly known as Sears Tower. Rising to 1,451 feet in height, this building should have been hidden completely by the 1,666.67 feet of curvature, which should have impeded the photographer's view of the skyline. Even just seeing the antenna on top of the tallest building should have been structurally impossible, and yet Joshua was able to capture and visibly portray the entire length of Chicago's panoramic cityscape. And I did include that photograph as well. That night, a Chicago weatherman on the evening news attempted to explain clearly what is seen in the image. His efforts to sway, to say that it was a mirage due to refraction. His boast was the next summer proven false by two of my colleagues, Rob Skiba and Rick Hummer. These gentlemen went to Chicago and made a video documentary confirming that one can not only see the picturesque Chicago cityscape from the side of Lake Michigan where Joshua took his picture, but then rode across Lake Michigan in a boat, filming the entirety of the city growing in scope and size as one came nearer to it. This documentary affirmed without a doubt that one could, in fact, see the Chicago skyline from such distance, and that it was not, as the weatherman had claimed, a mirage. He also interviewed several native Chicagoans from that area who all shared conclusively that seeing the Chicago skyline from such distance was a normal and daily possibility, and that the only things which could skew in some slight manner such viewing would be inclement weather. However, more or less it was daily possible to see the entire cityscape even when in windy conditions and when the waves from the opposite shores of Lake Michigan were even choppy. Example 3. Residents of the island of Oahu in Hawaii attest to being able to regularly view from their homeland the island of Kauai in excess of 90 miles distance from them. Such viewing should be improbable even at 200 feet of elevation, as there should be 5,400 feet or nearly a mile of curvature dividing those islands excuse me, from one another. And yet Hawaiian natives avow to their ability to see some of the other islands of their archipelago at such distance and range a regular occurrence. The Bible says, out of the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses. I'm going to get a sip of water. I'll be right back. All right. The Bible says, out of the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses shall the truth be established. This passage and premise had established lawful jurisprudence. I literally can provide hundreds of confirmations as to the validity of my claim, while Mr. Thompson cannot verifiably affirm one, which is reason why I denied his delusional claim that he had succeeded in satisfying the stipulations of the contest. And this is the final portion, and I do believe we'll have time to that I should be able to read this in its entirety, so we'll actually do that. Another little known fact which immediately forces one to consider whether there is any measurable curvature to the supposed rotundity of the earth. Surveyors, engineers, and architects are never required to factor into their projects the non-existent curvature of the earth. Structures such as canals, railways, and bridges, when assembled often over hundreds of miles, are, for example, always cut, measured, and laid out horizontally level without the mathematical calculation or allowance for any such curvature. Several eyewitness testimonies published in various 19th century publications affirm such notion. One surveyor, a Mr. T. Westwood, wrote into the January 1896 Earth Review magazine, quote, "In leveling, I work from ordnance marks or canal levels to get the height above sea level. The puzzle to me used to be that over several miles each level was and is treated throughout its whole length as the same level from end to end, not the least allowance being made for curvature. One of these civil engineers in this district, after some amount of argument on each side as to the reason why no allowance for curvature was made, said he did not believe anybody would know the shape of the earth in this life." Another surveyor and engineer of 30 years wrote to the Birmingham Weekly Mercury on February 15, 1890, "I am thoroughly acquainted with the theory and practice of civil engineering. However bigoted some of our professors may be in the theory of surveying according to the prescribed rules, yet it is well known amongst us that such theoretical measurements are incapable of any practical illustration. All our locomotives are designed to run on what may be regarded as true levels or flats. There are, of course, partial inclines or gradients here and there, but they are always accurately defined and must be carefully traversed. But anything approaching to 8 inches in the mile, increasing as the square of the distance, could not be worked by any engine that was ever yet constructed. Taking one station with another all over England and Scotland, it may be stated that all the platforms are on the same relative level. The distance between eastern and western coasts of England may be set down as 300 miles. If the prescribed curvature was indeed as represented, the central station at Rugby or Warwick ought to be close upon 3 miles higher than a cord drawn from the two extremities. If such was the case, there is not a driver or a stoker within the kingdom that would be found to take charge of the train. We can only laugh at those of your readers who seriously give us credit for such venturesome exploits as running trains round a spherical curve. Horizontal curves on levels are dangerous enough, but vertical curves would be 1,000 times worse, and with our rolling stock constructed as at present physically impossible. Engineer W. Winkler wrote into the Earth Review of October 1893 regarding the Earth's supposed curvature. Quote, as an engineer of many years' standing, I saw that this absurd allowance is only permitted in school books. No engineer would dream of allowing anything of the kind. I have projected many miles of railways and many more of canals, and the allowance has never even been thought of, much less allowed for. This allowance for curvature means this, that is 8 inches for the first mile of a canal and increasing at the ratio by the square of the distance in miles. Thus, a small navigable canal for boats, say 30 miles long, will have by the above rule an allowance for curvature of 600 feet. Think of that. And then please credit engineers as not being quite such fools. Nothing of the sort is allowed. We no more think of allowing 600 feet for a line of 30 miles of railway or canal than of wasting our time trying to square the circle. The Suez Canal, which connects the Mediterranean Sea with the Gulf of Suez on the Red Sea, is a clear proof of the Earth's and water's non-convexity. The canal is 100 miles long and without any locks, so the water within it is an uninterrupted continuation of the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. When it was constructed, the Earth's supposed curvature was not taken into account. It was dug along a horizontal datum line 26 feet below sea level, passing through several lakes from one sea to the other, with the datum line and the water's surface running perfectly parallel over that 100 miles. Quote, the distance between the Red Sea at Suez and the Mediterranean Sea is 100 statute miles. The datum line of the canal being 26 feet below the level of the Mediterranean and is continued horizontally the whole way from sea to sea, there not being a single lock on the canal, the surface of the water being parallel with the datum line. It is thus clear that there is no curvature or globularity for the whole 100 miles between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Had there been, according to the astronomical theory, the middle of the canal would have been 1,660 feet higher than at either end, whereas the canal is perfectly horizontal for the whole distance. The Great Canal of China, said to be 700 miles in length, was made without regard or any allowance for supposed curvature. That's David Wardlaw Scott in the book Terra Firma, page 134. The 5th of August, 1892, the German emperor performed the ceremony of opening the gates of the Baltic and the North Sea Canal in the spring of 1891. The canal starts at Haltenau on the south side of Kiel Bay and joins the Elbe 15 miles above its mouth. It is 61 miles long, 200 feet wide at the surface, and 80 feet at the bottom. The depth being 28 feet, no locks are required as the surface of the two seas is level. Let those who believe it is the practice for surveyors to make allowances for curvature ponder over the following from the Manchester Ship Canal Company. It is customary in railway and canal constructions for all levels to be referred to on a datum, which is nominally horizontal and is so shown on all sections. It is not the practice in laying out public works to make allowances for the curvature of the earth. Thomas Winship, Zetetic Cosmogony. The London and Northwestern Railway forms a straight line 180 miles long between London and Liverpool. The railroad's highest point, midway at Birmingham Station, is only 240 feet above sea level. If the world were actually a globe, however curvating 8 inches per mile squared, the 180-mile stretch of rail would form an arc with the center point at Birmingham, raising a full 5,400 feet above London and Liverpool. Adding the station's actual height of just 240 feet to its theoretical inclination, 5,400 feet gives you an altitude of 5,640 feet as the rail's necessary height on a globe Earth, more than 1,000 feet taller than Ben Nevis, the tallest mountain in Great Britain. And so it's basically telling you that, that station is 240 feet above sea level. And according to curvature, it should be 5,640 feet above in altitude from where London and the other station is, which is, again, taller than the tallest mountain in Great Britain. I mean, it's laughable when you consider the so-called curvature. In projecting railways on a globe, the datum line would be the arc of a circle corresponding to the latitude of the place. That the datum line for the railway projections is always a horizontal line proves that the general configuration of the world is horizontal. To support the globe theory, the gentlemen of the observatories should call upon the surveyor to prove that he allows the necessary amount for curvature. But this is what the learned men dare not to do, as it is well known that the allowance for the supposed curvature is never made. In a long line like that of the Great Pacific Railway, extending across North America, the supposed curvature would of course be proportionately great, extending to many miles in height, but not 1 inch was allowed by the engineers for curvature during the whole course of the construction of that vast line of railway. And if we think of it, how could it be otherwise? All railway metals must of necessity be straight. For how could any engine or carriage run with safety on a convex surface? J.C. Bourne, in his book, The History of the Great Western Railway, stated that the entire original English railroad, more than 118 miles long, that the whole line, with the exception of the inclined planes, may be regarded as level. the 1862 British Parliament section, which approved its construction, recorded in order number 44 for the proposed railway, quote, that the section be drawn to the same horizontal seal as the plan, and to a vertical scale of not less than 1 inch to every 100 feet, and shall show the surface of the ground marked on the plan, the intended level of the proposed work, the height of every embankment, and the depth of every cutting, and a datum horizontal line which shall be the same throughout the whole length of the work, end quote. And so you see over and over and over that bridges, canals, and railways are all constructed on a horizontal level. Just a couple more here. Yeah, we'll definitely have time to make it through this whole thing. And then I'll just comment a little bit. 118 miles of level railway, and yet the surface on which it is projected, a globe? Impossible. It cannot be. Early in 1898, I met Mr. Hughes, the chief officer of the steamer, the City of Lincoln. This gentleman told me that he had projected thousands of miles of level railways in South America and never heard of any allowance for curvature being made. On one occasion, he surveyed over 1,000 miles of railway, which was a perfect straight line the whole way. It was well known that the Argentine Republic and other parts of South America, there are railways thousands of miles long without curve or gradient. In projecting railways, the world is acknowledged to be a plane, and if it were a globe, the rules of projection have yet to be discovered. Level railways prove a level world, to the utter confusion of the globular school of impractical men with high salaries and little brains. Zetetic Cosmogony by Thomas Winship, page 109. Quote, that in all surveys no allowance is made for curvature, which would be a necessity on a globe, that a horizontal line in every case, the datum line, the same line being continuous throughout the whole length of the work, and that the theodolite cuts a line at equal altitudes on either side of it, which altitude is the same as that of the instrument, clearly proves to those who will accept proof when it is furnished that the world is a plane and not a globe. Contemporarily, the Danyang Kushan Grand Bridge in China, the longest bridge in the world, built over 4 years by 10,000 workers at a cost of $8.5 billion. A startling 164,800 meters in length. Like the canals and railroads mentioned above, did not in its construction take into account the rate of curvature as cited by the formula for determining such. No matter what one thinks about the evidence listed here, the evidence listed by me is factual and scientifically verifiable according to experimentation, which anyone can conduct and affirm for themselves. The evidence submitted by William Thompson, being in no manner relatable to real-world situations, cannot, as the rules required, be affirmed or scientifically repeatable and verifiable by anyone. Thus, why his so-called evidence was rejected, as it was in no way even applicable for consideration, as established by the rules of the contest. Neither do either of the so-called experiments which he submitted verify in any manner the rate of curvature decided by the formula listed in prior paragraph. I ask that the judge or jury considering this case throw it out of court as a complete waste of time, which it is. And with that, I closed my argument. And then we had a chance for Q&A where we could ask each other questions. I had nothing to ask of him. And then we went to closing remarks. And basically, with closing remarks, I just affirmed those things that I said, and that no matter, because he was attacking me the whole time, I also said that, labeling somebody a conspiracy theorist or trying to dismantle their beliefs or, project them as being baseless and basically attacking me and defaming me and trying to label me as a conspiracy theorist. All of that was to try to assassinate my character and had nothing to do with the case. And so the judge saw through all of that and agreed with me, and in comment said something to the point of that no matter what one thinks about the shape of the earth, whether globe or flat, that certainly the evidence must be considered with regard to, as far as measurable curvature. And don't quote me on this exact thing, because I hope to get an account of the actual court proceedings and to see exactly what it was that she said. But she did make mention of the whole debate between these two viewpoints in her closing remarks before ruling in my favor. And so I was greatly appreciative for that. And as I said, I don't believe or know of any other case where the question of whether the earth is truly spherical or if it is a flat plane and has no measurable curvature to have been argued by anyone in any court of law anywhere and considered by a judge when passing judgment at the end of hearing those arguments. And so I thought it was a monumental win for the flat earth community and for biblical cosmogony and for those that understand and know this as truth. God bless all of you wherever you may be in standing for that truth and for trying to reach and connect with people, and especially for those of you that have seriously considered what I'm saying and have examined it with open mind. Because I, like you, was extremely hesitant to begin to do so, unwilling, largely, to even look into this particular topic initially. But, as I cover so many controversial topics in the scope of the work that I do, I largely implore my listening audience to remain open-minded when examining whatever topic I may be speaking upon, and to go forth and to examine for yourself study for oneself whether possibility exists surrounding those things that I implore in Revelation. And so, with regard to being open-minded, it was something that my listeners had reminded me that I had also implored them to consider when speaking about things such as serpent seed or preexistence or whatever fringe topic I cover, because I do cover a lot. Which, even though it's labeled fringe, does not mean it's not true. It just means that it may be new to you, but certainly with regard to truth, none of us can ever learn anything if we are always closed-minded and believe we know everything up front already. Certainly over the last few years, since 2015, when confronted by this information and concluding in my own way and the Most High confirming through the book of Enoch and the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries that this in fact was truthful, and that the book of Enoch in 14 chapters speaks about the movements of the luminaries, the sun, the moon, the planets, and the zodiac. There's not one passage, one scripture, one verse that in any way details motion, attributing motion to the earth. And the Bible is the same way. And considering this, and even the fact that the Bible states in multiple places, in multiple confirming witness, that the earth is stationary, fixed, and non-moving. I mean, that it flies in the face of all that we've been taught and have bought into with regard to, again, the solar system and the whole ever-expanding universe model for understanding the world. And so, re-examining not only the canonical materials, but the extra-biblical texts, I was forced to see with new eyes and to regain with new perspective, understanding for what the scripture is detailing, especially when looking into the context of the original Hebrew or Greek, especially when considering the firmament. Because I think that structurally, the firmament is key for understanding biblical cosmology. And that we can see with things such as sundogs, moon dogs, rainbows, things of that nature, even the halo surrounding the sun, that we see these rainbows reflected and refracted from the crystalline surface of what is the firmament. I mean, undeniable that considering these things, they are visual confirmations as to there being a firmament, a solid structure, expanding and enclosing and fitted to the circle of the earth. And, for anybody that studies the Genesis timeline, you can't get over the fact that the earth existed before the sun and the moon the planets and the stars. That the heavens and the earth had already been established when the earth, during the war in heaven, had become destroyed. And so, and then looking at the fourth day, you'd see that the earth being destroyed is recreated. The firmament is fitted to the circle of the earth, which was inscribed upon the waters of the deep. On the third day, you have the dry land being elevated above the waters of the deep. And that's when the dry land actually appears, that God creates the mountains, which then in turn create the valleys, and that the water running off from this elevated land is what creates the rivers, the lakes, the ponds, the streams, the tributaries, all of that. And so the topography and the construct of the earth is established when God elevates the dry land above what is the sea level. And that the sea level is universal, that the waters of the ocean are contained in a basin, which creates, like a bathtub, the oceans take on the form of a horizontal straight line across the top. And that, it's that straight line that the sun moving in circle above the earth reflects in doing its circling thing. Sunrise, it enters into and returns to our field of illumination. It enters into our perspective and then travels across southern skies from east to west before turning up in arc. It leaves our perspective, disappears from our sight, having reached the vanishing point, will then return north and eastward, and circling in half an arc will return to our perspective 12 hours later. And that because of its circling like that, the sun pushes the shadow, the shade, which is also dependent upon its field of illumination, that night and day have co-equal measure and are symmetrically in opposition to one another because of that movement. And so these are the dynamics that one will learn when you begin to examine, look into all of this information, which, when you first start to consider any of this, it's at first difficult, very challenging to embrace. But facing the facts and facing even like the evidence which I had concluded and shared within this court case, one must embrace new possibility or remain ignorant as to the dynamics of the false cosmology. Because the whole thing of the Copernican model for understanding world is contrived. It's all based upon lies. And so no matter what one thinks about how it helps to explain natural phenomena, it's not based in truth, has no real world applications to life and being. And so, in my opinion, rather than trusting NASA one must look to the Bible, which is the inspired word of the Most High God, for revelation upon these things. He being the creator, the word who breathed, manifest, and sang the creation into being, I'm sure that in his gospel and in his prophetic word, he can also reveal to us, and does, the dynamics of the creation he established for us, because the earth was especially made for us, that we were especially made in the image of God to inhabit first paradise, but having fallen, we now find ourselves in this fallen world. And but God shares with us through the gospel and through the scripture and through the canonical and the extra biblical materials information on how he established the creation, how he manifests us, and how he manifests all the creatures of the world, and how he assembled and put together the spiritual and the visible worlds, and placed the earth in between as the meeting place, as the junction for spirit and matter. And, I share a lot of the information which is specific in the various ancient manuscripts which detail the construct of world. In my third book, Paradise, the Sides of the North, and the Mount of the Congregation, I go into great elaboration on the construct of the world. In the first book, I show in my three book set on flat Earth and cosmology. The first book, Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, I show how it's only by embracing that the world is a plane and that the luminaries are in fact moving above the circle of the earth, that one can then make sense of the vision that the angel Uriel shows and which Enoch details in explanation in the 14 chapters of the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries. And the second book of the set, I explain through all of the extra biblical materials specific the first 4 days of creation and how God established the earth and the heavens, then it becoming destroyed, that the firmament was established and fitted to the circle of the earth, the dry land elevated from what was the world is described as a plain. And then on the fourth day, the luminaries, the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, they are placed in the tabernacle of the heavens and given circuit and appointed routine and orbit. And they move in circuit through the seven heavens. Because, the heavens below the firmament are divided into seven according to the movement of the seven planets, which are the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter. Those are the seven planets of the universe as cited in Scripture. The earth is not included as a planet because it is not. It is a plane. It's where we live. The planets are luminaries, lights, celestial lights in the heavens. They are water and fire according to Scripture. There's no earth or terra firma ascribed to them. And these luminaries were placed into the firmament which was fitted to the circle of the earth. And so having circuit within that firmament, how is it that the sun can be larger than the earth? It can't be. It's so much smaller than the earth that it actually can move encircle under its firmament and above its face. And so I know it's still difficult, and for a lot of you, you think, that this topic is unworthy of introspection and that it's meaningless when it comes to salvation. But I tell you what, for all those people that believe in Darwin and that we evolved of a monkey and that are separated because of their belief from understanding and believing in the inerrant word of the Most High God as revealed by the gospel, that it is a salvational issue for them. And you think of all the children that are atheistic and that believe in NASA and science and that hold, Darwinism and evolution above that of our being specially designed and specially created by the Most High God. It's a salvational issue for them. I would say that scientism is the religion which is most bought into, and it's faith-based, and it's one that the world has been indoctrinated into. And there's a reason for it, and that it is connected to the coming reign of the Antichrist. Well, we're going to have to end it there, everybody. God bless all of you. Until next week. Shalom.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.